In the grand, sorrowful annals of the galaxy, the scars of the Yuuzhan Vong War are etched deepest. This was not a war of machines, but of agonizing biological corruption that left trillions dead and entire star systems ravaged. Upon the ashes of these worlds stood Jacen Solo, a hero of the conflict, but a man spiritually broken. He had witnessed a victory that felt identical to a defeat, a galaxy saved at the cost of its soul. This profound trauma became a crucible, forging a dangerous conviction within him. Think of it this way. He just survived the worst war in history, and his main takeaway was that the good guys almost lost because they weren't tough enough. He saw the Force, the guiding light his Uncle Luke revered, as a passive, indifferent spectator that watched worlds burn without intervention. This spiritual void, this agonizing disconnect between Jedi philosophy and the brutal reality he had endured, became the fertile ground for the darkness that was to come. He was a savior desperate for a new method, unaware that the method itself would demand his humanity as its price. The hollow peace that followed was, for Jacen, merely a silent scream before a greater storm. His meditations, once a source of calm, became a canvas for prophetic torment. He was cursed with terrible, potent visions of a new future. A second galactic civil war that would erupt from the ashes of the first. A conflict that promised to consume what little the Vong had left. Here's the key. This wasn't just a vague premonition. It was a high-definition preview of total societal collapse, and he felt he was the only one watching. He saw the New Republic tearing itself apart, fleets of Star Destroyers firing upon one another in a chaotic frenzy. At the dark heart of this vortex, he saw a shadowed figure sitting upon a throne of absolute power, and beneath that throne, he saw the one thing that truly anchored his soul. His young daughter, Organa, weeping alone in the ruins. This personal stake transformed his philosophical doubt into a raw, terrified, and dangerously focused mission. This future could not be allowed to happen. This agonizing burden of foresight became an isolating prison. How could he explain a future that had not yet occurred? How could he justify the extreme, necessary actions to prevent a cataclysm no one else could see? He looked upon the rebuilt Jedi Order, upon his own legendary uncle, Luke Skywalker, and saw not wisdom, but a dangerous, stagnant complacency. Basically, he felt like the only person in the room who could see the asteroid hurtling toward the planet, and everyone else was debating procedure. Their dogmatic adherence to the light side, their infinite patience, their unshakable trust in the will of the Force to Jacen, this was no longer a virtue. It was galactic-scaled negligence. He alone, he reasoned, possessed the terrible clarity and strength of will to become the fulcrum upon which the future turned. This messianic complex, born not of arrogance but of a terrifying and genuine sense of responsibility, was the first true fracture in his Jedi path. And as the light of the Jedi offered no solution, a shadow fell, offering a path. It was the voice of Lumiya, the self-proclaimed Dark Lady of the Sith, a living relic of the Emperor's age, yet intensely present. She emerged from the shadows of forgotten worlds, not as a cackling monster demanding worship, but as a pragmatic mentor who understood his burden. She spoke his new language, the language of proactive measures, of necessary sacrifices. Think of it this way. She didn't just offer him unlimited power in the classic villain monologue. She offered him a tool and a philosophy to achieve his good goal. She offered him the power to control destiny, not merely react to it. She whispered of a galaxy that craved order, a peace that could only be forged by a single, strong will. A peace that the Jedi, with their endless debates, were too weak to build. She was the serpent in his desolate garden, offering the one fruit he craved. The certainty of salvation. Wrapped in the crimson ribbon of the Sith, Jacen did not fall in a single dramatic moment. He descended step by agonizing step, each one seeming logical at the time. He wrestled with Lumiya's teachings, his Jedi conscience warring with his desperate need for a solution that worked. He saw the cold, brutal logic in her words. Why wait for disaster to strike? Why not preempt it? Here's the key. He still believed he was a Jedi, but he was trying to use Sith logic control, fear, and preemptive action to solve a Jedi problem. This internal schism was profound. He began to explore the darker philosophies, not for conquest, but for understanding, convincing himself that he could walk the shadowed path without being consumed. He believed he could wield the tools of the Sith while retaining the heart of a Jedi. It was the most ancient and seductive lie of the dark side, and he was beginning to believe it, blinded by the righteousness of his own intentions. The growing darkness in him, however, did not go unnoticed. Grand Master Luke Skywalker, the galaxy's unwavering beacon of light, sensed the perilous shift in his nephew. He confronted Jacen, his voice filled not with anger, but with a deep, sorrowful concern. He pleaded with him to turn back from the precipice, to release his paralyzing fear of the future, to trust in the Force. This was the ultimate dad you just don't understand moment, but on a cosmic, Force-sensitive scale. Jacen, now fortified by Lumiya's dark pragmatism, saw his uncle's wisdom as weakness. He saw Luke's unshakable faith as the very blindness that would lead to the ruin he foresaw. In a moment of tragic defiance, he rejected his master, his family, and his order. This argument wasn't just a disagreement, it was the sound of the final anchor breaking, setting him adrift on a dark and turbulent sea. His conviction now untethered from Jedi restraint, Jacen began his dark work under the veneer of galactic law. As a high-ranking officer in the Galactic Alliance Guard, he possessed the authority to act. His first steps were subtle, bending rules, bypassing oversight, classifying uncomfortable truths. Then they became overt. Basically, he started acting like a cop, then a judge, then an executioner, all rolled into one organization. He began using the Force for interrogation, not to sense truth, but to rip it from minds, peeling back layers with a cold ruthlessness that terrified his subordinates. He justified it as efficiency, a small measure of pain to prevent a galactic war. He was building his new order, one broken law and one fractured mind at a time, convinced each compromise was a necessary sacrifice for the greater good. The taste of control was intoxicating, not because it felt good, but because it felt effective. Jacen's network of control, enforced by the gag, expanded. He no longer just hunted terrorists, he began to hunt dissent. Senators who argued against this consolidation of power, planetary governors who prized their autonomy over his enforced unity, they all became threats to stability in his eyes. Think of it this way. He was so afraid of a future war that he started a smaller, controlled war himself, just to keep everyone in line. His methods grew darker. He mastered the art of Force illusions to frame his enemies and used mental domination to ensure the loyalty of his troops. The transformation was becoming physical. In moments of intense rage or cold calculation, his eyes, once the bright clear blue of a Solo, would flash with the acidic unmistakable gold of the Sith. The descent, once begun, accelerated with terrifying momentum. Each dark act made the next one easier, the justifications coming more quickly. He was no longer just bending the Force to his will, he was breaking it, forcing it to serve his vision. He mastered abilities the Jedi had forbidden for millennia, not because they were evil, but because they were corrupting. Here's the key. He was now fully in the end, justifies the means territory, and the means were becoming more and more brutal. He created secret police, orchestrated small-scale conflicts to expose his political enemies, and consolidated his military power under his direct command. The idealistic Jedi who had once wept for the galaxy's pain was gone, replaced by a cold strategist who saw the galaxy as a complex machine that only he knew how to fix. But the old galaxy would not yield to his new order without a fight. The few who saw the full, horrific truth of his transformation knew he had to be stopped. The one who saw it most clearly was Mara Jade Skywalker. She was not just his aunt. She was a kindred spirit, a woman who had once walked in the Emperor's shadow as his hand and had fought her way back to the light. If anyone in the galaxy could spot a good man turning into a Palpatine-level threat, it was her. She possessed the unique, cynical, and pragmatic worldview to see past his justifications. She tracked him, cornering him in the shadows he now called home, her green lightsaber igniting with grim purpose. This was not a plea from a master like Luke. This was a sentence from a warrior who understood, better than anyone, that such darkness could not be reasoned with, it could only be erased. The duel that followed was a storm of grief and terrible purpose, a clash of two of the most skilled and pragmatic warriors in the Jedi Order. It was a tragedy in motion. Mara fought with the desperate, ferocious precision of someone trying to save a soul. Her every move calculated to disarm, to disable, to find the Jacen she knew was still trapped inside the monster. Basically, Mara was trying to stop him, but Jacen was fighting to win. He, however, fought with the cold, lethal efficiency of the Sith. He saw her not as family, but as the final, most painful obstacle to his vision. He used his intimate knowledge of her fighting style, even her love for her son, against her. It was a battle not of skill, but of philosophy, and his new philosophy was utterly, terrifyingly ruthless. The tragedy was sealed in a moment of pure Sith calculation. He exploited an opening, a moment of hesitation created by his own cruel taunts, and delivered the fatal blow. As Mara Jade Skywalker, the Emperor's hand, the Jedi Master, the wife of Luke fell, Jacen crossed a threshold from which there is no return. This is the moment. Killing family? That's the final, horrifying exam for becoming a true Sith. And he passed. He held her, and in a fleeting moment of agony, a single, genuine tear traced a path through the grime on his face. It was the last gasp of Jacen Solo. He had murdered his own aunt for the sake of his greater good. The path was now clear of all obstacles, and it was paved with the blood of those he once loved. With the blood of a Jedi Master on his hands, he completed his transformation. He retreated to a hidden Sith sanctuary, a place of ancient, dark power. There, he took his lightsaber, the weapon of a Jedi Knight and a symbol of his past, and performed the ancient, agonizing ritual of bleeding. Think of it this way. He was essentially torturing the living kyber crystal in his lightsaber, pouring all his pain, his rage, and his terrible, resolute purpose into it until it broke. The crystal screamed in the Force, and its color, once a symbol of peace, corrupted and bled into the violent, unmistakable crimson of the Sith. It was a baptism in darkness, a final renunciation of his old life, and a full embrace of his new, terrible identity. He rose from that darkness, not as Jacen Solo, but as a new and terrible power in the galaxy. He donned the dark robes and armor befitting a Sith Lord, a dark echo of his grandfather's, yet uniquely his own. He was no longer the conflicted Jedi, the grieving hero. He was a being of singular, terrifying will. Here's the key. He embraced his new title, Darth Caedus, a name derived from the word for slaughter, signifying his willingness to kill anything, even his own past, to achieve his goals. He was now the master of his own destiny, the self-appointed architect of the galaxy's future, and he was ready to impose his will upon it by any means necessary, with no one left to hold him back. And so, the prophecy was fulfilled, not by an outside force, but by the very man who sought to prevent it. Darth Caedus ascended to the seat of power, the High Lord of the Galactic Alliance, the de facto emperor of the new order he had forged. Basically, he became the exact evil Dark Lord on a throne that he saw in his original vision. He sat upon the throne, the shadow he once feared, now his own. The tragic, cosmic irony was complete. In his desperate flight from a future of tyranny and war, he had run directly into its arms and molded it in his own image. He had become the architect of the very ruin he had given his soul to stop. His reign was one of iron and fire, masked as the Caedus Peace. It was a galactic order maintained by the overwhelming threat of his fleet and the brutal efficiency of his secret police. Think of it as peace through tyranny. If you disagree with him, he blows up your city to pacify you. Worlds that resisted his unification, like his father's homeworld of Corellia, were met with brutal, overwhelming force. He commanded his forces to fire on civilian targets, to make horrific examples, to crush all hope of rebellion. This was not peacekeeping, this was systematic terror, the cold logic of a mind that now saw beings not as people, but as variables in a grand equation for galactic control. But the galaxy did not forget the heroes of its past. Han Solo and Leia Organa, his parents, the legends who had toppled the First Galactic Empire, now faced the impossible, heartbreaking task of confronting their own son, the new Emperor. This is the most heartbreaking parent-teacher conference in galactic history, where the parents have to tell their son to stop being a dictator. Leia, her heart shattered, pleaded with the monster that had been her son, listing his atrocities. But Darth Caedus was unmoved. He dismissed their pleas as naive sentiment, the same weakness that had crippled the Jedi and the New Republic. He explained his actions with a cold, terrifying logic. Their suffering, and the suffering of the galaxy, was a small temporary price to pay for a future free of war. As his tyranny spread and his actions grew more monstrous, the Force itself prepared an answer. It was a solution born of perfect, tragic symmetry. His twin sister, Jaina Solo, who had always been the warrior, the sword of the Jedi, accepted her grim destiny. Here's the key. In this mythic story, the sword, Jane, was destined to strike down the tyrant, Jacen. Trained by her uncle Luke, armed by the Mandalorians, and driven by a grief that matched his own conviction, she became the galaxy's last hope. The stage was set for the final, devastating confrontation, a battle not just of siblings, but of two halves of the same soul, one consumed by a dark vision and the other forced to become the instrument of its end. The final battle was a cataclysm of force and feeling, fought in the heart of Caedus' flagship, the Anakin Solo. It was a duel of equals, twin against twin, light against the shadow it had cast. They fought with a brutal, agonizing familiarity, anticipating each other's moves as if they were their own. Basically, this was the ultimate showdown, and Jaina had to do the unthinkable to save everyone. But Jaina, armed with the knowledge of his past and the pain of his betrayals, found the one opening he could not defend. She struck the mortal blow, plunging her lightsaber into her brother's heart. As the life drained from him, the golden rage in his eyes flickered, the mask of the Sith Lord cracking for the first time. In the final, fleeting moment, as the veil of the dark side lifted, one last echo of Jacen Solo remained. As Darth Caedus, the tyrant, died, he did not rage against his end or curse his sister. Instead, he used the last second of his life to reach out through the Force, not in anger, but in love. Think of it this way. His very last action wasn't Sith, it was Jedi. He sent a final, desperate warning to his daughter Organa and her mother Tenel Ka, saving them from a trap he himself had set. His legacy remains this terrible paradox, a Jedi who became a Sith to save the galaxy, who failed utterly, and who only in death performed one last, selfless, redemptive act. His story echoes as a tragic myth, a warning that the path to hell is paved with the noblest intentions.